Brand new hour of Iowa Live. We thank you for joining us once again. But something you could always count at the top of the hour when it is 9 o'clock is checking in with Professor Jeff Stein to talk about something that relates back to our great state of Iowa with something known as the Iowa Almanac. And if you're into sports, you definitely want to pay attention because we have something perfect for you this morning. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning to you both. Beautiful day out.
No question about it. And just the other day, we were talking about that it's very close to the anniversary of when the official rules of the game of basketball were first printed and they were first published back in the day. And it sounds like when you speak about basketball and the University of Iowa, a lot of people think about Carver Hawkeye Arena and the field house. But really, basketball at University of Iowa goes way back, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And something that happened in Iowa City on this date in history led to something you would have seen in that first published set of rules. Because it was on this date in 1896 that University of Iowa physical education instructor Henry Collenberg welcomed a fellow named Amos Alonzo Stagg to campus. Stagg was the athletic director at the recently founded University of Chicago, and the purpose of getting together was an experimental game in a brand new sport.
Now, Stagg's name became famous in history for college sports, but how did the two of them finally meet?
Yeah, there's the Amos Alonzo Stagg Bowl for college football, but they wound up meeting at a YMCA training school in Massachusetts some years before, back in 1890. The next year, that school's director of physical education invented a new game called basketball. And of course, that was Canadian-born James Naismith, who was working at UMass at the time. So when people wonder why the Basketball Hall of Fame is in Springfield, Massachusetts, that's because that's where the game was invented, at UMass by James Naismith.
But of course, because of those connections, basketball then came to Iowa City. But when we think basketball, as we've discussed before, Professor, it's not necessarily the game we think of now when we turn on a TV or go to a local facility.
Absolutely right, Jackie. No orange ball, or sometimes it's multicolored. No, back then they just passed a soccer ball up and down the court. You got points by landing that soccer ball in a peach basket. By 1893, iron hoops and a hammock-style basket, kind of an elongated basket. Those were both introduced, but it would still be another decade before open-ended nets were added, so until the early 1900s, the ball had to be manually retrieved from the basket each time a goal was scored. Somebody got on a ladder and pulled the ball out of the basket. Now, luckily, they weren't very good shots back then, so the games were rather low scoring. But that was the scene in Iowa City on this date in 1896. People with ladders having to lift the ball out of the basket. The University of Iowa's Collenberg, the athletic instructor there, he refereed the game. Now, the University of Chicago defeated that Iowa City Collegiate team 15-12. Now, the game is historic not because of its score, but because it was the first unofficial college basketball game played with 5 players on each side. As the game was being invented, they had a variety of different manifestations, 3 on a side, 6 on a side. That was the first time they went with 5 on 5. They liked it, and it became the standard we know today. And it was created in Iowa City when that game was played on this date in 1896.
Wow, I didn't realize that Collegiate game, the first one, was right here in Iowa. We love finding out about these little nuggets of information.
You would think it wouldn't take too long for the guy going up and down the ladder to be like, if we just cut a hole in the bottom of that thing, I wouldn't have to do this every time.
You almost wonder if the basket just wore out. In other words,
That's true.
It just fell through.
I know, maybe give the guy something to do. I don't know.
But the games are really low scoring as opposed to the one game we saw last night where I think Golden State scored 146 points last night. So again, when you have scores in the teens, it's probably not as exciting of a game, is it?
Well, and it was probably 1 point per basket, but still, it was not exactly, I can just imagine the hole in the basket and somebody said, darn, the basket has a hole. Wait a minute. maybe we're on to something.
Yeah, maybe if they were better shots, after a while, you'd been like, okay, I'm done going up and down the ladder. Let's figure this out.
All right, so if people want to go back and revisit with what we just got done talking about today, about the first collegiate basketball game played in the country was played in Iowa City. How can they go about doing so?
Yeah, the last guy picked for the teams wound up being the ladder guy.
Right? Right? It's like, oh, man.
Or the only guy like you and me, Professor, because we weren't picked, so we were the ladder guy.
That's right. That's right. Sitting here crossing your fingers. I don't want to be ladder guy. You can learn more about that first 5-on-5 game at iowaalmanac.com, and we give you a preview every day on Twitter and Instagram as well at Iowa Almanac.
You know, Professor, being an incredible author that you are, no book has been written on the ladder guy in the early forms of basketball. Could you do some investigating on that and see if there's some untold stories we need to dig into?
That would be great.
That's a great idea. That's a title of a book.
Lou just gave us the title. The title of the book could be The Guy Not Picked.
Or Ladder Guy.
Ladder Guy.
Perfect.